All right, I'll just do a brief review of where we are up to and what we've been doing up until now. So in previous Mamorim, up until this point in time, we have been discussing the union of the Esses, which is the union of the whole of the Orient Sof before the Tzimtzum. In other words, what he measured out, so to speak, to himself, what's going to be, what would be in the future. That's, so to speak, the union of the Esses After the Tzimtzum, these come out in the Kav as the Esses Blima. They come out in the Kav, but there's still no union of keilim. It's only an union of Oiros. And it's only later on that in Olam HaAtzilus that the Oiros become Muluboshim in keilim. We made a whole discussion of the union of Hislapshus, where Hislapshus is the union of Helem Haor in the keilim. In other words, in order for the Oiros to be Mulubosh in the keilim, for them to be dressed in the keilim or clothed in the keilim, the oiros have to go through some kind of tzimtzum, but that's how they get differentiated. The oiros get differentiated into various oiros. In other words, even though initially we said that there is already an or of chesed in the or and sof even before the tzimtzum and kol shekain in the kav, nevertheless, it doesn't become an or of chesed b'poil until it's becomes melubash in a kli. That's more or less the earlier in your name that we spoke about. Then once he started speaking about his lapsus oiros and the keilim, he says the following, that the union of his lapsus is that this brings about a situation of mala umata in the oiros. In other words, before the oiros meluboshim in the keilim, there is no inyan of mala mata in the oir. It's all one madrega. It's all one inyan. But his chalkus mala mata comes about through his lapshus in keilim. And he gave an example of that, the inyan of koichas hanefesh, the various powers of the neshama. For instance, the inyan of chochmah and binah. Chochmah is regarded as higher than binah because it's more or than kli. The kli of chochmah is a kli muat. Masha Enki, and the kli of binah is a kli rochav, right? It's a kli rochav, but because it's a kli rochav, the or is mismayet when it's reduced when it comes to be melubish in the kli. As it's bechinas chochmah, it's bechinas shota. In other words, mufshat. It's not really clothed yet in the keilim, but that comes about later on. He also spoke about the inyonim of koichos atzmiyim, which is not what we're talking about here, because those are koichos that are not in the kli. For instance, the koich of ahava atzmis. Ahava atzmis is a koich of rotzon. It's not a koich of midos. And here, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the union of midos. So we're about to begin Perek Lamed Daled, and in Perek Lamed Daled, he takes this moshel that we spoke about before, the moshel of the union of the keilim, the moshel of the union of the koichas hanefesh, and he transposes it into the union of oiros and keilim l'mayla. Okay, so Perek Lamed Daled, v'adugim zeivun l'mayla. The Chochmah may riboy or in Chochmah you have the Indian riboy and miutakli, and the two are related. In other words, the riboy or depends on the miutakli, and the miutakli makes the riboy or a higher madregian or. Let's explain it now. We'll just get into it first, and then we'll explain more. The fisher Chochmah who becomes miutakli. The kli of chochmah is an akuda. It's not a kli rochav like the kli of binah, and therefore the ikar inyan in chochmah is the inyan of or, which is why chochmah is the reishis chochmah, yiras Hashem, reishis chochmah. Also, the inyan of chochmah is basically the inyan of or. There's various psukim that describe this inyan. Which are not coming to mind right now, but in any event, the inyan of chochmah is the inyan of or. So I can't remember what the psukim are. In any event, remember the psukim isn't. Or is it chochmah? In any event, it doesn't matter. The psukim are not the ikar, but the ikar in Inyan is that chochmah is mute hakeilim ribui haor. The chochmah gama kli hu be'erech haor. The kli of chochmah is like as if it was or. It's be'erech to the or. In other words, it's
chochmah sodom meir al pnei
tayyipon. Chochmah adam tayyipon. There you go.
meir al pnei kol haaretz.
Chochmah adam tayyipon as well. Yeah, chochmah adam tayyipon. That shows you that chochmah is oir, and then Eliezer said another pasuk, which is chochmah
Odom meir al pnei kol haaretz.
al pnei kol haaretz.
Hakdama to the Tanya, I think that.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Good. So those are the Indian of chochmah and oir. Now, again, the Indian of the kli in chochmah. Why is it a mute of a kli? You would think that a mute of kli is like olam hatoihu, where the keilim muatim and the oir is merubim. So that's not exactly what you want. But he's explaining over here that the Indian of the kli, when we talk about mute of kli, we're talking about bittul of the kli. It's a madregan bittul of the kli. It's not necessarily an Indian in size, the kamus of the kli. It's the echus of the kli that's the ikar. The echus of the kli is chochmah is like the or. It's on the echus of or almost, right? Which is what he just said. The chochmah gama kli hi be'erech el or. And he then quotes from Pardes Rimonim being the Sefer the Ramak, whose Yotzat was yesterday. Chof Gimel Tammuz was the Yotzat Ramak. And so he says in Pardes, Shar Shemois, Da Hashem Chochmah, Da Hashem the Chochmah Hu Yudkai. As we know that every Sphira has a Shem associated with it. The Sphira of Keser has associated with the name Ikya, Aleph Hey Yud Hey, Aleph Kei Yud Kei. The Sphira of Chochmah is Yud Kei, as he just said over here. Binah is Shem Havaya Ben Nikud Elokim. Then Chesed is Kel, Elokim is Gevura. Gevura is Elokim. Then Tiferes will be Shem Havaya again, and we'll explain that a little bit later. And so it goes on. Netzach Havaya Tzva Ois. And then Hoid is Elokim Tzva Ois with Tzva Ois, as some people say. Yesoid is Shin Dalet Yud, and Malchus is Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. Right? Okay, so Shin Dalet Yud, it's Yesoid, and Malchus Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. Okay, so all of the spheroids have Shemois associated with them. Associated essentially with the well, he's going to explain it. Let's just get into it. So he says again, Pardes says that the chochmah is bechinas Yud Kei. The Shem Yud Kei associated with it. Ba'agos lebir deva'er takuf samaches, which is from Alter Rebbe. Kosov, there he wrote the Hari b'Tiferes shu Bria Chatichoin. Tiferes is called the Bria Chatichoin. Bria Chatichoin was the a link or a pole that you had in the Mishkan that went through the center of all the boards of the Mishkan and tied them all together. It was called the Briach HaTichon. It went from one end to the other of the Mishkan, and miraculously, according to some Jerusalem anyway, it went around the back as well, and around all the side, the entire side, even though it was a metal pole, somehow or another got all the way through, according to some, in a miraculous fashion. However, it happened, maybe there were links in it, we don't know, but whatever, that's called the Briach HaTichon, the thing that ties everything together. So Tiferes is the sphere that ties everything together. Why? Because Tiferes is associated with Chesed and Gvura. It's Makabel from Chesed and Gvura. It's Mashpia on Netzach and Hoyd and Yesoid. It's Makabel from Da'as. And since it's Makabel from Da'as, it's also Makabel from Chochmah and binah. And if you don't count Da'as, then it's Makabel from Keser. Right, the couple of cases because in the middle column, anything in the middle column is in fact tied into all the spheres around it, and Tiferes is tied into all the spheres from top to bottom, and that's why it's called the Briach HaTichon. So in Tiferes, the Briach HaTichon is called a Kli Hu Shem Havaya. Not only is the Oyer Shem Havaya, but the Kli is also Shem Havaya. And that's the importance of the sphere of Tiferes, and that's the central sphere of, it's really the central sphere of Olam HaAtzilus. The central shame of Olam HaAtzilus is Shem Yud Kavavke, and central sphere of Olam HaAtzilus is essentially Tiferes. Why? Because the inyan of Atzilus, the central partzuf that's Meir in Atzilus is the partzuf of Zeir Anpin. And so the central sphere of Zeir Anpin is Tiferes. In fact, the Zeir Anpin is built around Tiferes, so to speak. So this is therefore called the Briach HaTichoin. And he says in the paradise, if Shem Havaya is associated with Tiferes, Kol Shekayim Kal V'Chomer, when we talk about chochmah, is the kli and inyan of very close to the inyan of or. Since in Tiferes the or and the kli have the same shame, how much more so in chochmah the or and the kli have the same name. Avop, that is not the name of Havaya, but it's Yudke, which is even loftier than the Shem Yudke Vavke, as we know from the inyan of Shemus. In any event, that's what the from the paradise and then from the Alter Rebbe. Somewhere else, it says as follows. He says as follows. The Alter Rebbe says as follows: Ki Havaya hu ha'oiros da'atzilus. Shem Havaya is the oiros. V'Shem Elokim hu ha'kli. And in general, the Shem Elokim is the inyan of kli. Now, this has to be explained. It's quite a long explanation. I'm not going to go into the whole thing now. But in general, if we talk about in a general sense, the inyan of Shem Havaya is the inyan of Oyer. Shemesh Mogain Havaya Elokim. Shemesh, right? Shemesh, the sun, and the Mogain, the sheath around the sun that prevents it from expanding and so on. Shemesh Mogain Havaya and Elokim. So Shemesh is Shem Havaya. That's the inyan of Oyer. The Shemesh, the sun, is the inyan of the Oyer. And Mogain, that's the inyan of the keilim. That's Shem Elokim. So Havaya is the Oiris, the Atzilus, Shem Elokim in a general sense is the inyan of keilim, even though there are specific keilim for each sphere, as we said before. There's Shem Kel b'Chesed, that's in the Kli of Chesed, Shem Elokim b'Gvura, and so on and so forth, as we just explained. Nevertheless, in a general sense, all of the keilim are the inyan of Shem Elokim. And in this, there are three bechinas, the three aspects of the name Elokim. Three aspects of the keilim. What are the three aspects of the keilim? The pnimius of the keilim, the emtsoi of the keilim, and the chitzonius of kli. So we have those three in yonim. Each aspect of the kli comes from a different madrega. Right? One aspect of the kli, the pnimius of kli, comes from a higher partzuf, but there are klal the inyan of pnimius of kli is nimshach from chochmah and binah. The inyan of emtoyes kli is the midos, and the hashpor of the kli is the lower midos of netzach or yesod. That's the chitonis that are related to that. There are various mamorim where they explain that these actually come from the inyonim of the keilim come from three madregas and keser. Three madregas and keser. The pnimis kli comes from radlo, and the emtoyes kli comes from atik, and the chitonis kli comes from arich. Zoy Zokman in Sipra Kabbalah as well. The imkain. In any event, the word goes like this: that the keilim of the inyan of Shem Elokim, the imkain, are the binah, who is chabrus haor im hakli. So the or is connected to the kli through the sphere of binah. Is chabrus haor im hakli olachein hu havaya benikud Elokim. And therefore, the first real inyan of keilim is in binah, not in chochmah, because chochmah is a nakuda. It's not yet a complete kli. It's bitul, and therefore it's nakuda. Masha ein kain, binah is mamash a kli, and therefore the shame associated with binah is havaya benikud Elokim. There are those that say that the other opinions that the shame associated with binah is elokah, right? Elokah. But here he's going with the inyan of Shem Havaya, but Nikud Elokim. So it would be pronounced, even though the oasis is the Shem Havaya, which is the inyan of the Oyer, the Nikud is Shem Elokim, that's the inyan of the Kli. So in Binah, you see the Oyer and the Kli come together in one name. Al chochmah nikres havaya levad. Chochmah is only the inyan of oyer kisham rak iu v'chayoy chad. In there, in chochmah, it's the inyan of iu v'chayoy, he and his chayus. In other words, the chayus that is essentially the inyan of oyer or chad. In other words, the or of chochmah is still the bechinas chad with lamalim in a chochmah. Still bechinas chad with keser or with afilu lamalim in keser. The inyan of ihu referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. Ihu v'chayoy chad. Lamalim bechinas garmoy. Garmoy is the inyan of keilim. Right, garmoy means causations or actions, pu'ulas. That's the inyan of garmoy. There's a drosh in Chassidus called Dimon Menei Adam in Orot of the Tanakh Tzedek. I think in the Sefer in Yonim. Probably says that in the footnotes. Anyway, that's where that rhyme is found. Okay, but there are klal. Chochmah is only a nakuda. What does it mean that chochmah is a nakuda? It means it's before it's mispashit. In other words, it remains on the madrega of lamaylim in keilim to a certain extent. Alpha p that is melubish nekli to a certain extent. It's still lamaylim in keilim. But chochmah ma'ayin timatze. Chochmah comes out of a madrega of ayin, and the pnimis of chochmah is ayin. That's why chochmah can be broken into two words according to the Tikkun Zohar. Koyach ma. Right? Chochmah is koyach ma. The koyach of bitul, the koyach to not be melubash in a kli, and therefore chochmah is a nakuda levad. It only remains as a nakuda of oyer. It doesn't actually become a fully fledged kli with his pashtus and so on and so forth like binah does. Shu bechinas ayin, as we just said. Al kain wal kochach mei sham haor beriboy, and that's why the light in chochmah is beriboy. In other words, it's not matumtzam by the kli. The kli is not matumtzam in the or because the kli is almost the bechina of or, and therefore the or is beribu. Binah nismaita or, but when it comes to binah, the or is reduced quite drastically. Ismaita or while the fish keilim the binah bechinas mitzius. The keilim and binah are already in a state of mitzius. In other words, they're a yesh. To however much you can say yesh by binah, but it's the inyan of yesh. Ayin is chochmah, yesh is binah. That's the way it was explained. Bechinas ayin v'yesh. So that's binah who bechinas who havaya b'nikud elukim, and that's why binah is havaya with the nikud of elukim. In other words, the pnimius of it is oyer shem havaya. The nikud of it, in other words, the kli is the inyan of elukim. Yeah, the elukim who inyan keilim, as we just said. Binah bechinas hasoga. What is the inyan of binah hasoga? To grasp an inyan. In other words, to mamti an inyan, hamtov an inyan, a new insight, a new flash of insight. That's an inyan of chochmah. But to put it into the keilim of a thought process, of an intellectual structure, that is the inyan of binah. Binah is asoga. It grasps things, right? It grasps the binah bechinas asoga, shtu bechinas yeshu metzias. That when it comes to binah, it's called a yesh. It's called a metzias. K'mo shekasuv, like the Apostle says, lahanchil or havai yesh. What's that? Yesh. Yesh is the inyan of Gan Eden. It will be the inyan of Lasid Lavoy. Lahanchil or Havai, to give them the nachala, the inheritance of Yesh. What's that Yesh? That's not the Yesh of Yesh, is Olam Hazeh Gashmi. That's the Yesh of Olam Haba, which is the inyan of Binah. In other words, Hasoga of Elokus. Yeah, then Olam Haba will grasp Elokus. That's the inyan of Binah. The Yesh keilim and bechinas metzias, and that binah is called yesh because the keilim there are actually metzias. Al kana or bechinas miyut. Therefore, the light is reduced. Again, why is the light reduced? Because the kli itself that's its function is to mamayit the or. It's there to reduce the or in order to be able to hand it down further to the lower spheres. And bonim. The bonim are the spheres of Zer Anpin, and the inyonim nimshach down to the down to the bottom. And that's why binah, the keilim, the keilim binah reduce the oil so that it can pass on the oil. Mama Razal, Gabi Meya Shiloach, like there's more in Erchin, or Arachin as it really should be pronounced. And amongst the yeshivish, they always call it Erchin, but in any event, in Gemara Arachin, it says like this. It tells a story. Gabi Meya Shiloach, one of the kings of Israel at that time, made a gzeira. I forget who it was exactly, but one of the kings made a gzeira that the Mei Shiloach, the Shiloach spring, would only give out a small amount of water. The hole from where the water would flow was a small hole. It's only the size of an isar. An isar is a fairly small coin. How big it is actually compared with our coins, I don't know, but it's probably the size of a dime or something. Maybe a dime or a quarter. Yeah, maybe the size of a quarter or something. Huh?
Quarter,
yeah. Yeah, about the size of a quarter, probably something like that. That's called an isar. And so the hole that it came in, the water came out of the shiloach was the size of an isar. So this king understood that people needed more water than that, or he wanted to provide the people with more water, so he commanded that they should make the hole bigger, right? Make the hole bigger, you'll get more water. You make the kli bigger, you get more oil. And exactly the opposite thing happened. Yeah, so that's what they did. They made it bigger. And the water got less, right? The water got less. Why? Because the kli was bigger, now the water got less. And actually what happened was, and he gave another tzivoy to close it back up to the original size, and then the water came out the way it used to always. Because he understood that was the wrong thing to do. It was obviously a miraculous thing. It wasn't the Teva Mistoma, but this proves the Rebbe's point over here. The point is that when the keilim are rechavim, then the oirois are muatim, right? Or at least the quality of the oil is a different quality. It's not so much the inyan of reading and mute in that sense. It's more the inyan of quality rather than quantity. In any event, behind the wicking is mute a keilim. When there are fewer keilim, when the keilim are like the keilim of chochmah, meir gilo, then there's more of a gilo. Shnizrachu keilim mismaita, or when the keilim become wider, then the oil becomes reduced. And since in binah this is the union of Izrachus keilim, the keilim are wide, they're broad. Mismaita or gilo, the gilo is much less. The binah malim al chochmah. That binah conceals, it covers over, it conceals chochmah. This is what the pasuk means when it says v'heinif yadoi al hanahar. This is talking about last level when Mashiach comes. It says v'heinif yadoi al hanahar. What is this talking about? Just like before Matan Torah, there had to be the inyan of Kriyas Yamsuf. Alter Rebbe explains in the Torah why Kriyas Yamsuf was a necessary pu'ula that had to happen before Matan Torah, and the basic explanation is that Yam Suf represents the inyan of Malchus. In order to be able to get to a higher gilur than Malchus, you have to rip through, you have to tear apart the inyan of Malchus in order to get to a higher madrega. The same thing will happen last Lavoy, except there it'll be v'heinif yado al hanahar. The nar is the inyan of binah, as we'll see. The nar is the inyan of binah, and that has to be sort of torn apart, so to speak, in order to be able to get to the inyan of chochmah last Lavoy. V'heinif yado al hanar bayam lucho, and then hikahu l'shiva necholim. You'll break it up into 7 streams, right? Whatever, but the idea is there has to be a breakthrough through binah in order to be able to get to a higher madrega, and that's what will happen last level. So v'noida naharu b'chinas binah. Naharu b'chinas binah. Acid, yeah, b'kiyas hanar. In the future, there will be the inyan of the splitting of this river. B'chdei sheyeh gilui pnimis haTorah. In order for the Primus HaTorah to be revealed. Before that, when we come to the inyan of Niglish Torah, Matan Torah, so that was B'kiyas Hayam. Now there has to be B'kiyas HaNahar. That was B'chinas HaMalchus, this is B'chinas HaBinah. In order to get to the Primus HaTorah, which is the inyan of Chochmah Sheb'Torah, a chochmah that's ganuz in the Torah, so binah has to so to speak, be split, and then we be able to get to the inyan of the oil of Torah. So gilu b'chinas chochmah. The revelation of chochmah will come about as a result of that. The kshem should be kriyas yamsuf. Haya hachon l'matan Torah, just like kriyas yamsuf was a preparation for matan Torah. God matan Torah, haya tzarich liyos getting kriyas yamsuf. There had to be kriyas yamsuf, as actually, and I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe explains in Likutei Torah, the Yam hu b'chinas malchus. Yam is the inner malchus, shukoneses v'ne'elemes b'soicha oiros da'atzilus. All the oiros of atzilus only are gathered into malchus, and it's only from malchus that the lower oilimus, or the worlds of Biyah, B'yitzir and Asiyah, can be makabel at this point in time. And that's why, in order for the oil of atzilus to come down, the malchus had to be split apart. Shezeu Giloi Atzilus, the revelation of Atzilus, Hayatzarech is Kriyas Hayam. Vahele, the Yam, the Malchus, the Indian Malchus had to be split apart in order for it to be a Giloi. Kvokain lasted, as will be in the future. The essence of Chochmah will be revealed then. There had to be Bakiyas Hanar. Now you could ask the question, wait a second, the Matan Torah wasn't everything given. Doesn't it say Anonashik Slavis Lahavis? I gave myself in writing. In other words, I gave you me, myself, the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah. Yes, it's there, it's in the Torah for sure, but it's Ganus, right? It's not the Bechinas Gilui. What we have in the Torah is the various stories that are told in the Torah and the various halachas that are mentioned in the Torah. But the Chochmah Velukus is not begilui. In other words, the chochmah or the way to be revealed, lasid lavoy, is not easily attainable, is not easily visible within the Indian Torah, but it will be in the future. That's called the kiyas hanahar. Since binah is itself a mitzius, as we just explained, it conceals the oil. All kain, and therefore there has to be this splitting apart the river. Zer Anpin again, it's 3 rows from Chesed to Yosoid. The Kol Shekayim Malchus, Shesham Ikar Inyan keilim. That's where the Ikar keilim are. The keilim on the starting binah, but the Ikar Inyan keilim is in Zer Anpin and Malchus. Zer Anpin is the Inyan of the origin of space. It comes from Zer Anpin. That's why it has 6 sides. A 6-sided space. 6 sides of space, up and down, front, back, right, left. That's the Inyan of the 6 sides of space, because Zer Anpin is like shaped like a cube, so to speak, as how the spheres are laid out. And Malchus is the Inyan of Zman. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloich, Melech Malach Yimloich. That's the Inyan of. It's also an Inyan of keilim, the kli of time, right? But the kli of time is also only in Malchus. In Malchus, you don't really have time. You have an Inyan of Seder Hazmani, means Zer Anpin, but Lamaila in binah and kol shekayin and chochmah, you don't have any inyan of time at all. In any event, let's continue. And there in Malchus, the or is in a state of miyut. I think it's a misprint over here. B'madregas ha'elyonis, that's what it is. B'madregas ha'elyonis, hamispar hamaruba yoiser. What is this? A madregas in your?
Madregas.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. B'madregas ha'elyonis, hamispar hamaruba yoiser. Sometimes you'll find that when it comes to numbers, when the numbers are explained, numbers in the Torah are very significant, and there's different explanations. Sometimes the bigger the number, the higher the madrega. Sometimes the bigger the number, the lower the madrega. When he's going to explain like this, when we're talking about the inyan of oiros, the bigger the number, the higher the madrega. When we're talking about keilim, the bigger the number, the lower the madrega. Right? That's the. So he's going to explain. When you come to lower madregas, the mispar becomes reduced. And sometimes it's said the opposite way. Mayos, 10 singles, tens, and hundreds. The yechido is b'malchus, asir is bezor, Meis bechub, chochmah and binah. Or alternatively, Yechido is Haim Bazo, Bazo and Malchus, Yechido and Zo and in Malchus. Vasirois are in chochmah and binah. Umeya bekesed. Yedu mashkaza vehi chayisara meya shana ve'esim shana v'shem shanim. The Sheva, 7 is the Indian of Zer Anpin, because Zer Anpin really, even though Zer Anpin is only 6 spheroids, before Malchus is separated from Zer Anpin, which is the whole thing. I think we spoke about this before. It's called the Nasira, when Malchus is separated from Zer Anpin. I teach a lot of different memory. I'm not sure what's in the Sefer or in a different one, but anyway. So when Malchus is actually part of Zer Anpin, then there's actually 7 spheroids in Zoh. Yeah, there's Malchus, which is called Ateres HaYesoid, right? It's part of Zer Anpin itself, Ateres HaYesoid. In any event, that Inyan of Sheva is Shaykh to Zer Anpin. The Esrim 20 is in chochmah and binah. In other words, 10 chochmah, 10 binah. You may have a kesef. That's the way the Zohar explains it. Kuchabrichu is skalil. Mi asa ilah. Steaming the kol steaming. Beraza de meya birchon. The secret of 100 brochas. Let me just translate that for you. It says in the Zohar, Kuchabrichu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is skalil. Include ma'asar ilah, this higher madrega, the asar ilah, higher place. Steaming the kol steaming. The hidden of hidden, beraza the mea in the secret of mea bichon. In other words, the 100 brachas. In 100 brachas, that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, so to speak, which is why we have to try and say 100 brachas every day. That's what the Gemara says. There's 100 brachas that a person should say every day, which if you think about it, 3 tefillos of Shmoneh Esrei, that's already, there's actually 19 in Shmoneh Esrei, so it's 57. That's 50, and then there's brachas in the morning, there's brachas on food, and so on and so forth, after the bathroom. You could reach 100 brachas with not so much difficulty. In any event, no, as the as Sforim talk about this, other Mamorim talk about this Zoya. Thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands also in Kesef. In that mind. In any event, okay. Sometimes the lower number is signifies a higher madrega. The kosher lamata yosef is rabbi hamispar, and oh boy, sorry, I just switched this one off here. Let's just get back to it. Yeah, all right. Just faster. Okay, we're getting back in 1 second. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is the difference between Orot and keilim. So we just explained that sometimes the higher number seems to be the higher number seems to be a higher madrega, and sometimes the higher number seems to be a lower madrega. How does this work? It's explained b'makom acher in another mimer somewhere. Shezeu hafresh ben ha'oros lahakeilim. It's the difference between Orot and keilim. The mitzad ha'oros, as far as the Orot are concerned, kol mashalamayla, the higher the oil, mispar meruba yoseh, there's more, the number is greater. Now, don't make a mistake that it's not differentiation of actual numbers that's important. That just means that it's a mispar meruba. Yeah, the higher the number, forget about the individual units that make up the number, but the higher the number shows that it's a higher inyan. It shows it's a higher quality of inyan. Roshan Bechin is mispar. It's not that the or itself is mispar. We're not talking about quantity, we're talking about quality. Rakshahu Bechin is riboy ha'or. And riboy ha'or, therefore, is shaykh to riboy ha'mispar. Right? And the more it descends down below, mismata or vagiloy, the oil becomes reduced. But the opposite is true of the keilim. Mitzad keilim l'mayla yoser hu mispar hamuat. The fewer the keilim, the higher the madrega in the kli. The higher the kli is miuta keilim. Because there's less keilim, there's more oil, as we said. V'chol masha yored lamata yoser. And the further it goes down, the more misrabi ma'kelim, the more there are kelim. Well, there is Moshe Bashpor, the second of the Rav la Talmud, like the Shashpor from a Rav to the Talmud, Hari Rav, Einu Mashpia as a Seichel, Kmo Shehu La'atzmai, like Efes Katzeu Levad. When the Rav is giving over a concept to his Talmud, he doesn't give it over the way he understands it. He has to give it over according to the keilim of the Talmud, and therefore he has to explain things beriboy oisius, right? He has to give over the concept in a lot of keilim and a lot of letters, a lot of words, which is actually one of the very interesting things about Rashi. The beauty of Rashi is that he manages to give over everything in very few words, but he gives over everything. That's why people are so medayik in Rashi, because he was such a chochem that he was able to put huge concept into a very small space, right? And that was his koyach. And also when the Talmud gives over to his Talmud, he doesn't give it over the way he got it. So it goes from level to level. In other words, you hear a drosha in the shul, right, which the Rav learned from his from a sefer or whatever it was. The way it was put down in the sefer was already a tzimtum, and then the sefer of the Rav, so he's speaking to the people in the shul, he wants them to understand, so it further becomes reduced. And then when you go home and you say it over at the table to your wife or to your kids or to both or whatever, yeah, it gets reduced even more because the keilim of the kids are not ready yet to be able to grasp this madrega. The only eight is for the wife to go to shul too, and the other drosh for herself. Then she can argue with her husband about what the Rav said. All right. In any event, just joking. Mitzad keilim, as far as the keilim are concerned, the hari kol sheba hashpor lamata, the further down the hashpor goes, uberiboy oisius, uberiboy inyonim. The more it goes down, the more letters are necessary, the more concepts are necessary to explain the Indian. That the mashpia in himself and for himself, it doesn't need all of those things. It's only for the sake of the Talmud, rak b'shvil makabels, the sake of his students. Soon we're gonna let's just do a couple more lines and then we'll have to finish. And so too in when we're talking about higher madregas and madregas elyonis yoisem beriboy. Sorry about that. The higher the madrega, or beriboy keilim b'miut. There's more oil and less keilim. The more it's drawn down and the further it's drawn down, you have more keilim and less oil. Talia, one thing is dependent on the other. The more the fewer the keilim, the fewer the keilim, or the more the oil. And when the many keilim, misma'ita or. So basically, again, this is an Indian. It's not necessarily an Indian in number. It's more an Indian in quantity, in quality rather than quantity. And that's why it's written in the future. V'nar ben me'ah shana, a young kid of 100 years old, because obviously the lifespan will be increased over there. But it's called a young kid not because of his age necessarily, but because of his katnus. He's katnus amoichin. He's not yet. He's only a nar. He's immature. His intellect is as yet immature. Katnus between his miuta, or he's only on the madrega of 100, right? And 100 is miuta, or he didn't get to 1,000, didn't get to 10,000, 100,000, million. He didn't become a millionaire in Yedias yet. So that anar la'asid lavo yis'ale la'asid between his me'ah l'malam mizikna. He's going to be in the future. He's going to go to a much higher madrega l'malam mizikna, much higher than the zikna of now. Mizikna v'seiva shehu shishim v'shivim shana. Right, because now a person is regarded as old when he's 60, 70. Well, things are changing a little bit already as we get more towards Lasit Lavoi. People get a bit older, but particularly strong person, 80 years. But their lifespan is about 70, 75 years, something like that. In any event, Shishim Shivim Shana. Our days on earth about 70 years, approximately. Therefore, 100 is obviously beyond that. People who are called Narim, in the future, they'll embarrass the Zakanim. Why? Because the Narim, the Narim that will be in the future will be higher than the Zakanim of now. Right? And therefore, there's not so much the Indian of Yeridas Adoris as we would think. In the future, it's going to be Aliyas Adoris. From those that were regarded as Narim will be smarter than the Zakanim in the future, which gives us some hope. Okay, by Indian who? I think we'll stop over there. We explain the Indian of. Should we finish it? I don't know. Should we finish it? What do you think? Go more than an hour. Let's leave it at an hour. Okay.
It's a very positive note.
Yeah, it's a positive note to stop on. Yeah. Good. All right, folks. We will end it here. I hope that I'll put the recording up as soon as I get home. And I hope you could hear it. It's all it's not clear to me that everything's working. It's supposed to, but all right. Good night and see you, Bezos Hashem, next week.